Have you ever felt that exact moment when life changes colors? When the ticking of the clock seems louder than your own heartbeat, and the air feels too heavy to breathe? That's how it all began. An ordinary morning, cold, silent, the kind of morning that doesn't warn you it's going to change someone's destiny. In that empty bed, the smell of the coffee he used to make still lingered, the echo of old laughter, conversations interrupted by time, and there, sitting on the edge of the bed, a 79-year-old woman held her husband's portrait like someone holding her own past in her hands, trying to figure out how to continue alone after a lifetime of sharing. She didn't cry loudly. The tears fell slowly, as if they too were tired. The love of her life had left, and with him, it seemed, the meaning of the days had disappeared. The plants in the window wilted, the clock continued to tick, and the silence in the house was almost deafening. Every corner held a memory. The coat hanging on the multi chair, the shoes he wore for walks in the park, the radio still tuned to his favorite station. Longing had a smell, a sound, a weight. And in that moment, it seemed impossible to imagine a tomorrow. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling that the world keeps turning, but has stopped turning for you? When all that remains is the echo of what was, and the fear of facing what comes next. She felt this every day. She opened the window, hoping the wind would bring answers, but the wind only brought memories. The neighbors still waved, but she couldn't see them. Life went on outside, but inside her, time seemed to have stopped the day he left. But what you're about to discover now may surprise you, because behind that weary gaze lay something she didn't even know was still alive. Courage, the courage born from pain, the quiet strength that emerges when all that's left is to move forward, even without knowing where. The days passed, one after the other, like pages in a book she had no desire to read. At night, the emptiness of her bed seemed greater. Her body grew tired, but her mind remained restless. Memories returned, old smiles, plans that never came to fruition. And amidst this invisible grief, she began to notice something subtle. Her heart was still beating, slowly but beating, and each beat was a reminder that, however painful, she was still alive. It was then that the fear began to transform into something new, not hope yet, but a slight uneasiness, a question she began to ask herself. What if there's still something for me? It was a timid question, but one that ignited a spark, the same spark that would one day ignite the flame of a new beginning. The clock, which had previously only reminded her of lost time, now seemed to mark something else, perhaps the time to begin again. And though her heart still weighed heavily, she began to realize that even broken things can remain beautiful, that life, even when it seems empty, can still surprise. Stay with me until the end, because what happens from this moment on shows that the end of one story can be just the beginning of another. A story about loss, courage, and the quiet power of a woman who discovered, late for the world, but too early to give up, that starting over is the most beautiful act of self-love anyone can experience. And as she watched the sky through the window, for the first time in a long time, she didn't cry. She just took a deep breath, as if realizing that the air still enters, that the body still responds, that the soul, no matter how tired, still insists on staying. It was in that moment that she understood. Perhaps the love of her life had left, but the love of her life hadn't, and that small difference would change everything. She began to walk slowly through the house, touching objects as if revisiting memories, but this time without getting lost in them. There was something new in the air, a kind of sad yet lively calm, an acceptance that didn't mean giving up. It simply meant a new beginning. Because deep down, every new beginning is born of loss, and every loss, when experienced well, makes room for something we don't yet understand. But that time reveals. Maybe you felt this too at some point, that silent pain of losing someone or losing yourself. And maybe this video is reminding you that, even after everything, there's still life inside you. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most so far. Sometimes, what you write can help someone else who's going through the same pain and needs to hear that they're not alone. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with stories like this, stories that heal, inspire, and remind the world that it's never too late to start over. So, if this message touched you, please leave a like. It may seem small, but each like helps this story travel further, finding new hearts, igniting new hope. And if you want to continue following real stories like this, of courage, of starting over, and of life, subscribe to the channel here. That way, you'll be part of this community that believes no age is too late to start over. Here, each story is a reminder that life always offers a second chance, even when we think time has passed. She didn't know it yet, but that feeling of lightness, of breath entering differently, was the first step toward something that would completely change the course of her life. And it was. Precisely in that moment, amidst the longing and the silence, that the unexpected began to unfold. The days passed like shuffling feet, unhurriedly and aimlessly. The clock continued to tick, but inside that house, time seemed to have stopped. The curtains remained open, not by choice, but by forgetfulness. The plants in the window lost their vigor, as if they too had given up waiting. She would wake early, make coffee, arrange 2 cups, and only then would she remember there was no one else to sit across the table. It was in these small, automatic gestures that her husband's absence felt most cruel. Silence became a strange companion. Sometimes she would leave the television on, just to hear a human voice, even if it was from a program. Visitors who once filled the house with laughter and the smell of cake began to dwindle. Friends drifted away. Her children had their own lives, and she remained there, amid memories and bills to pay. It's curious how life, when it takes someone away, also takes with it the meaning of small things. The creak of the gate, the scent of a shirt, the sound of a newspaper being folded. All of this now was a memory. She spent hours leafing through photo albums, as if searching for a reason to carry on. Each page was a story, a timeline marked by smiles that would never return. But amid the melancholy, there was something subtle, a quiet restlessness that lurked among the memories. It was as if her heart, even tired, still beat for some reason she didn't yet understand. Time passed, and the routine became predictable. The same cup of coffee, the same chair on the porch, the same feeling that the world outside was moving at a different speed. Sometimes she thought that was what growing old was, watching her own movie while the cast leaves. But somehow, there was an invisible force within her that refused to accept that this was the last chapter. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was hope, that word that insists on being born, even in the most arid soil. The hidden truth is that emptiness doesn't always come to destroy. Sometimes it comes to reveal. When everything falls silent, what remains is her own voice. And it was in this silence that she slowly began to hear something different. A kind of inner whisper telling her that the story wasn't over yet. It's behind the scenes of pain that many transformations happen, even when no one sees them. Gradually, her gaze changed. Still tired, but more curious, she began to notice the movement of the wind, the birdsong, the people passing by carrying bags, the laughter, and the rush. It was as if the world was calling her back, reminding her that there was still life pulsing out there, and within her, too. The impact of loneliness was transforming into a kind of silent force, almost imperceptible, but alive. She didn't know it yet, but that would be the starting point of a new journey. A journey of decisions, of rediscovery, of beginning anew. Because time, when it seems to take everything, sometimes only makes room for the new to blossom. What if time didn't take away dreams, but just waited for the right time to make them come true? Comment below. What memory from the past still makes you feel that life has something to give you back? The news came like a sudden shadow on a seemingly ordinary day. A phone call, an examination, the doctor's cautious gaze. The diagnosis fell upon her like a silent sentence. Cancer. For a moment, the ground seemed to disappear. The walls of the office slowly spun, and everything she heard afterward became a distant, muffled, almost unrecognizable sound. It was as if the entire world had stopped breathing. At 79, she had already lost the love of her life, and now, life itself threatened to leave her as well. That night, she sat alone in the living room, clutching the crumpled paper of the results. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes no longer cried. Sometimes the pain is so deep that not even tears can reach it. The clock ticked the same rhythm as always, but time, inside her, seemed to have changed direction. She looked at the photos of her husband and thought, maybe I'm going to meet him. But in the next instant, something inside her, perhaps the same instinct that had always kept her going, whispered a refusal, a no, an internal scream that said, not now, not like this. From then on, the real battle began. Long treatment sessions, hair falling onto the pillow, her body weakening, and a faith that wavered between despair and hope. There were days when she wanted to give up, days when the mirror seemed like an enemy, days when fear took over everything. But whenever her mind gave in, her heart remembered. She had survived a war before, the war of loss. And those who survive grief learn to fight differently. She discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep going even while trembling. Behind the scenes of pain, she learned to talk to her body, to be grateful for each morning she woke up, even if it was in pain. She discovered the power of presence, the impact of a simple act of self-care, the value of a fragile smile amidst the chaos. There was something transformative happening there, a revelation that only those who stare into the abyss can understand. Sometimes you have to reach your limit to finally see yourself. Each day in the hospital was a lesson in humanity. People came and went, some returned, some never returned. And yet, there was life. There was love in the glances that met, in the hands that touched silently, in the small victories hidden between appointments. She began to observe this with a kind of gratitude not learned from books. The illness, paradoxically, gave her back what time had taken away. The awareness that being alive is, in itself, a miracle. As the months passed, her body responded. Slowly, the treatment began to show signs, and when the doctor announced the tumor had regressed, she didn't celebrate. With euphoria, he simply smiled, closed his eyes, and murmured, "I knew it." Not because she was certain of the outcome, but because, somewhere deep inside her, there was an old conviction that there was still something to live for. Healing came not only in the body, but also in the mind. Her mindset shifted. She saw that time wasn't punishing her, but shaping her, that every pain had a purpose, and every loss, a hidden seed of new beginnings. And it was with this new perspective that she began to understand life, even hard, could still be her ally. Perhaps the hidden truth of all this is this: we only understand the value of being alive when tomorrow is no longer guaranteed. The following months were a test for her body, and above all, for her soul. The treatment was slow, painful, full of ups and downs. Her hair began to fall in silent strands onto the pillow, and the image in the mirror became increasingly difficult to face. Her skin lost its glow, her strength waned, but her gaze remained alive, insistent, almost stubborn. There was something inside her that wouldn't be extinguished. Sometimes it was just a thread of hope, thin, fragile, but it was enough to keep her going. On days when no one appeared, the silence grew heavy. She looked out the window, watching people come and go, each with their own invisible dramas. And there, in the midst of that isolation, she began to understand something profound, that solitude can destroy, but it can also heal. Because it is in solitude that we truly hear ourselves. In the early hours of the morning, when sleep eluded her, she spoke to God, not with rehearsed words, but with a weary and sincere heart. "I don't want to live forever," she said. "I just want to live meaningfully." And perhaps it was that simple request that changed everything. Faith, once discreet, began to blossom between the cracks of pain. It wasn't the faith of someone who expects grandiose miracles, but of someone who believes in the miracle of waking up another day. Each morning became a silent victory, a kind of rebirth. She learned to be grateful even for the bad days, because she understood that even suffering has a purpose, to remind us that we are still alive. As her body weakened, her soul grew stronger. She began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed: the sound of rain, the smell of warm bread, the touch of light shining through the curtains. Small things, but now they seemed to have immense value. It was as if life, realizing how close she was to giving up, decided to reveal itself in details. And in those details, she found refuge. The hospital became a stage for transformation. She began observing the other patients, each with their own story, and saw herself reflected in many of them. Some gave up too soon, others smiled even through the pain. It was there that she understood that courage isn't about resisting constantly. It's about falling and getting back up as many times as necessary. And she got up, slowly, silently, but with a strength that only those who have faced the abyss can understand. Her journey was no longer just about physical healing. It was about reclaiming purpose, about transforming pain into a new kind of faith, a faith that doesn't depend on promises, but on presence. She stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What's all this for?" And this shift in mindset was the true turning point. Now, imagine the impact of this discovery, understanding that suffering doesn't come to punish, but to reveal, that behind every tear lies a lesson, and that God's silence is sometimes just the most profound way to teach. This revelation brought peace, a serene peace, one that doesn't scream, but sustains. She was still weak, but there was a new sparkle in her eyes, and perhaps the world would never realize it, but something inside her had awakened, something greater than fear, greater than pain. Comment below. When was the moment when life taught you something that no words could explain? When the doctor said the words she'd been waiting for, "You're cured," time seemed to stand still. She smiled, but it was shy, almost restrained, like someone unsure whether to celebrate or breathe slowly so as not to break the spell of that moment. The team's applause, the hugs, the smell of disinfectant mixed with tears, it all felt like the end of a long war. But in the silence of the night, when she arrived home, she realized something no one had told her. Survival is only the first step. What comes next is learning to live again. The body was healed, but the heart still ached. The husband was gone, the illness was gone, and along with both, the sense of routine was gone. The phone no longer rang. Work was a thing of the past, and retirement barely covered the bills. It was strange to be alive and yet feel lost. The hidden truth of healing is that it doesn't automatically bring a new path. It simply restores the chance to choose one. And that choice, for someone who has spent so long struggling just to exist, can be daunting. The following days were silent. She woke early, drank coffee, stared at the horizon, and tried to understand what remained after the storm. Her body weakened, the refrigerator nearly empty, her heart full of questions. Yet there was something subtle in the air, a kind of quiet gratitude, as if simply breathing were a victory. It was as if life were saying, "You've won, and now you need to figure out what to do with that victory." Over time, she began walking around the neighborhood. My legs ached, but the wind on my face brought a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. With each step, she remembered the sleepless nights, the prayers, the silent promises she'd made to herself. She realized that the fear of dying had transformed into a different fear, the fear of not living long enough. And it was in this contrast that a new mindset emerged, that living is more than just existing. It's about choosing a purpose, even if it changes every day. She began talking to neighbors, observing people's movements, noticing the hurried smiles and the stories hidden in every glance. She began to understand that deep down, everyone carries some kind of emptiness. Hers simply had a name, and it was precisely in this emptiness that the seed of a new beginning began to germinate. Sometimes the most profound transformations happen when the noise of pain finally subsides. She realized she didn't need to rush or plan grand achievements. She just needed to take one step at a time, gradually rebuilding her confidence in being alive. The faith that had once sustained her healing would now be the foundation of the new phase, rediscovering who she was and who she could still become. As she prepared dinner alone, she looked out the window and saw the sky change color. A simple sunset, yet so beautiful it made her heart race. It was as if the entire universe silently said, "There's still time." And it was there, in that moment of calm and simplicity, that she understood healing was the beginning, not the end. That morning, the sun came through the window with a different light. It was no longer the same brightness that illuminated days of pain, nor the cold clarity of empty mornings. It was a bright, almost symbolic light that touched her face like an invitation. She got up slowly, went to the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, saw herself not as a survivor, but as someone ready to begin again. The wrinkles, once a source of sadness, now seemed like scars of victory. Every line on her face told a story, and none of them spoke of weakness. There was something new in her gaze, determination. She opened the drawer, took out an old notebook, and began to do the math. The money was small, almost nothing, but she had a simple certainty within her. Dignity doesn't require fortune, only purpose. She grabbed an apron she'd kept since cooking for her children, and decided it was time to do something with her own hands. She gathered flour, sugar, flowers from the backyard, and the last of her courage. On the sidewalk in front of the house, she set up a small makeshift shack, 2 planks, a towel, a dream. The first few days were silent. Few people stopped. Some hurried past, others looked curiously. She didn't let herself get down. She placed a vase of flowers in the corner, arranged the still warm cakes, and smiled, even when no one came. Because deep down, that smile was for herself, a reminder that she was alive and moving. The smell of freshly baked bread began to spread through the street, and little by little, destiny began to change shape. Children began to stop, drawn by the sweet aroma. Neighbors began buying, first out of kindness, then out of pleasure. And through exchanges and simple conversations, she regained something that cannot be bought: belonging. It was as if the world, little by little, was recognizing her again. Each coin received was a small miracle, not for its value, but for what it symbolized, an exchange between her effort and the affection of others. Now, think about it. How much changes when we make a decision? There is no transformation without action. And that woman, who once thought she had nothing left, was proving the hidden truth of life. It is when all seems lost that rebirth approaches. She didn't expect success, only peace. But the universe has a curious way of rewarding those who act with an open heart. The eye. Flowers decorating the table began to attract attention. Some people came just to chat, others to ask for advice, and she, who had once felt invisible, began to be noticed again. The mornings were no longer silent, and emptiness began to give way to gratitude. In that small space, between the smell of bread and the scent of flowers, she rediscovered the meaning of existence. One day, as she wiped her hands on the tablecloth, she looked around and realized something extraordinary. She was no longer the same woman who had gotten sick, cried, and doubted herself. She was a new woman, not because she had regained what she had lost, but because she had learned that strength comes not from what you have, but from what you decide to do with what remains. As the weeks passed, that small, makeshift sidewalk stall ceased to be just a point of sale. It became a refuge. The smell of warm bread and the scent of flowers mingled in the air, and passers-by felt something different, a kind of simple peace rare in these busy days. People began to return, not just to buy, but to chat, to hear a bit of wisdom from that 79-year-old woman who, without realizing it, transformed every sentence into comfort. She spoke of starting over without using words, only with the calm demeanor and steady gaze of someone who has weathered storms and learned to dance in the rain. Soon, the neighborhood began calling her the Flower and Cake Lady. The nickname came naturally, almost like a collective affection. There was something magical about the way she treated each customer. She remembered names, asked about their children, offered an extra piece of cake when she noticed sadness in someone's eyes. That small gesture of generosity spread through the street like perfume, and without making a sound, she became a symbol of strength and tenderness, living proof that hope can blossom even after the longest winter. The curious thing is that while everyone saw her as an example of courage, she still saw herself as just someone trying to survive. But there was a hidden truth behind this. The greatest transformation happens precisely when we stop seeking recognition and start acting out of love. The impact of her presence was real. Children left notes with drawings of flowers, young people greeted her on the way to work, and even strangers came from far away to meet her, drawn by an energy that couldn't be explained, only felt, and she, with her flower-stained hands, and her face scarred, by time, greeted every glance with a smile that seemed to say, "Life broke me, but it didn't destroy me." That was what charmed people, the lightness of someone who carries no pride, only gratitude. Every day, before opening the stall, she placed a new flower in the vase in front. She said each flower represented someone trying to start over, and perhaps that was why the place never lost its luster. It breathed meaning. Now think about it. How many times do we go through life without realizing, we're inspiring others? She didn't have social media. She didn't give speeches. She didn't seek applause. Yet, what she built with that small daily gesture reached hearts. Because when kindness is genuine, it doesn't need to be publicized. It simply spreads. Sometimes someone would leave extra coins with the purchase. Other times they just came to say thank you. A man, moved, once said, "You don't just sell flowers and cakes, you sell hope." And she laughed, a little awkwardly, not realizing that in that moment, she was healing much more than her own wounds. She was helping people believe in humanity again. The world around her remained the same, but not her. Her tent became the portrait of a new mindset, that simplicity can be revolutionary, that faith is proven in small gestures, and that it's possible to be reborn even when everything seems over. One day, while arranging the bread and changing the water for the flowers, a young man approached with a camera slung around his neck. He was a journalist, curious about the stories the neighborhood was telling about that woman with the calm smile and warrior's hands. He stayed there for hours, listening more than asking questions. There was no rush, because her every pause seemed to say more than words. When he left, he promised to return, and he did, with a crew, a simple recording, no scripts, just the truth of a woman who decided to blossom after pain. Days later, the story aired. A small, almost unassuming piece, but it spread with the speed of things that touch the heart. The images showed the colorful stall, the flowers trembling in the wind, her shy laugh, saying she wasn't just selling cakes, she was selling good memories. And something in that simplicity resonated with people. Within hours, thousands of comments appeared. People said they cried watching the video. Others said she reminded them of their own mother. Others confessed they hadn't felt so eager to live in a long time. The news crossed borders. Messages began arriving from everywhere. Packages, letters, photos, even small gifts sent by strangers. She couldn't understand how something so simple, a tent, a smile, a piece of cake, could have such an impact. And perhaps that was the hidden truth of it all, the power of authenticity. When someone lives with purpose, the whole world feels it. The mornings were different. Sometimes lines formed in front of the house. People wanted to meet this lady who had faced the impossible and still had the strength to smile. Some arrived with flowers, others with stories, many with tears, and she listened to them all with the patience of someone who understands the weight of silence. She never portrayed herself as a heroine, simply saying, "We must continue, even when the path seems to end." It was her way of teaching without lecturing. Now, if we look closely, there's a powerful revelation behind all this. Her journey shows that the simplest decisions are the most transformative. She didn't plan to be an inspiration, but she became one because she lived truthfully. And truth, when felt, multiplies. No marketing or fame can overcome the power of a true story. The small business, once hidden, became a symbol, not of success, but of a new beginning. Journalists returned. Programs wanted to interview her, and she remained the same, humble, laughing at her own wrinkles, thanking everyone for their kindness, and repeating that she'd never done anything special. But everyone saw the opposite. She had done something extraordinary, having faith when no one expected it. Over time, even the flowers seemed to bloom differently. The garden in front of the house became a landscape of hope, where each petal told a memory, and each glance held the promise of a new beginning. Write it down. Hope also blossoms in me. The interview took place on a calm afternoon, amid the flowers she cultivated herself. The journalist, already known for his first report, returned not to discuss the success of the story, but to understand the soul behind the woman. They sat in front of the small tent, the distant sound of passing cars, the sweet smell of freshly baked cakes, and the soft song of a bird that seemed to accompany the conversation. He asked few questions, and she answered with the serene manner of someone who has learned not to chase the right words, because truth, when lived, needs no rehearsal. When asked what kept her going, she smiled, a slight smile, but full of meaning. After a brief silence, she replied with the calm of someone who discovered something that time took decades to teach. When life takes everything from you, it's only leaving you space to begin again. It was simple, yet so profound that even the wind seemed to stop to listen. That sentence passed through the camera, across screens, across invisible boundaries, and reached where it needed to go. The hearts of those also trying to start over. People watched and felt as if she were speaking directly to them, even though they'd never met her. Perhaps because deep down, everyone has experienced a moment when they needed to rebuild something within themselves. Now, there's something almost no one noticed. The power of her words didn't come from speech, but from experience. It was the weight of the journey transformed into lightness. Each syllable had the impact of someone who'd seen the end and yet chosen the beginning. And that's why she was so moving, because she wasn't trying to teach. She simply shared what she'd learned from her own heart. After the interview, the messages poured in. People said they'd decided to visit their parents after years away. Others said they'd quit their hated jobs to start a small business. And even those in the midst of grief found the courage to believe there was still time. She didn't respond to everyone, not for lack of desire, but because she believed her role was simply to plant. He said that every word spoken with love finds the right soil at the right time. The hidden truth is that she wasn't talking about starting over. She was the beginning. Her story reminded us that what defines someone isn't what they lost, but what they decide to do with what's left. There was a silent, almost poetic wisdom in her that only time grants to those who face life head-on. And the more the world tried to label her as a symbol of overcoming, the more she repeated, "I only did what my heart told me to." Perhaps this is the lesson the whole world needs to remember. That courage isn't about not feeling afraid, but about continuing to tremble. That emptiness is sometimes the very space where God plants the new, and that the most luminous people are, in fact, those who have known darkness. After the interview, her life was never the same. The small garden in front of her house, previously known only to her neighbors, became a visiting spot for strangers who arrived with flowers in their hands and teary eyes. Some came to thank her, others simply to hear her voice in person, that calm voice that seemed to mend the wounds of their hearts. She didn't understand the reason for such affection. She said simply that she was simply telling her own story. But what she didn't realize was that, in that gesture of humility, there was something powerful, the courage to be real in a world that has learned to hide its own scars. The truth is, people were tired of hearing perfect stories. They wanted to see someone who had faced pain and still chosen love. And she offered exactly that, without realizing it, without forcing it, just being who she was. Between the lines of her journey, there was a silent revelation. The new beginning of one can spark the new beginning of many. And that's what happened. The letters kept coming. Stories of widows who decided to travel alone, retirees who reopened businesses, young people who reunited with their parents after years. She read each one with teary eyes and kept them all in a wooden box, like someone collecting pieces of hope. She called that box "My Paper Garden," because she said it also contained flowers, only made of words. Now, the most beautiful thing is realizing the invisible impact of a simple gesture. When a life transforms, the whole world changes in small waves. And so, without planning, she became a symbol of something much greater than overcoming. She represented the essence of humanity, the ability to rebuild. With each new visit, with each new story, she saw, reflected in the eyes of others, what she had once also sought, a reason to continue. She used to say that grief is like winter. It arrives uninvited, but prepares the soil for spring. And as she served coffee to passers-by, she repeated in a calm tone that the secret to living is not running away from pain, but learning to flourish even within it. These words, spoken with the wisdom of someone who has lost almost everything, began to echo beyond screens, beyond borders, beyond time. But the most impressive thing was yet to come. A producer wanted to make a documentary about her story, and when she saw the cameras rolling back, she smiled and said, "But what are you going to film now? I'm just living." And that was exactly what captivated her. Her life wasn't made up of grandiose deeds, but of small daily acts of courage, the kind of courage that changes the world without making a fuss. With each new day, more people approached her, and the more her fame grew, the simpler she became. She continued to carefully arrange the flowers, knead the cake batter with her own hands, and clean the sidewalk before opening her stall. Because deep down, she knew. It's behind the scenes of routine that the true miracle lies. If you've made it this far, perhaps something in this story touched you deep down and somehow reminded you that there's still time to start over. This woman's journey isn't about luck or destiny. It's about courage, the same courage that lives within those who decide to keep going, even when the world seems to have stopped. And if this video gave you pause, a breather, or even a spark of hope, please leave a like. It's a simple way to show that this message resonated with you and to help this space continue to share stories that truly touch you. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel, not just as a random click, but as someone who decides to walk along. Here, each story is a reminder that life can be rewritten even when it seems too late. And, so I know, you stayed with me until the end. Write in the comments. This message was for me. I want to see how many people still believe in the power of a new beginning. There's a video here that complements this story and will inspire you even more. Click and stay with me there, because sometimes all the heart needs is one more story to believe again.